Okay, A pushers, we've moved on now to the middle colonies. This is New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. You've already hopefully completed that chart from yesterday, and now let's get into some specifics. Okay, these are the middle colonies that we're going to be talking about. And they are described as being very diverse, different economies, different types of people. Okay, remember seasonal climate, much like the New England colonies. They are growing food for the rest of the colonies, wheat, corn, and potatoes. They've got forests, they have lots of trade, and they've got access to rivers and, of course, to the coastline. So roads were horrible, and that's the way they were moving. Okay, this was a chart that we looked at yesterday with your founders. We'll talk about Peter Stuyvesant, the Dutch founder of New York. Actually, it was Henry Hudson who claimed it for the Dutch. New Jersey, it was Charters, William Penn, the Holy Experiment for the Quakers, and the Swedish spread from Pennsylvania into Delaware, named after Lord Delaware. Okay, let's talk about New York. Okay, New York was known as Old New Netherlands, and pretty much during the 1600s, it was the golden age of the Dutch history. They were a commercial and naval power, and they actually fought 3 major wars with England. So they are establishing some colonies, and in this area of the world, mainly in the East Indies. This is showing Henry Hudson's voyages. Notice he had 3 voyages, and famously he gets dumped on his 3rd voyage, never to be seen again. There was a mutiny. But in the meantime, he has claimed this area for the Dutch. So New Netherlands is founded in the Hudson River area about 1623, and it's established by the Dutch West India Company, much like the joint stock companies that we talked about before, and it was for profit. And the main profit during this time and in this area was the fur trade. So the company isn't paying a whole lot of attention to the colony. It's basically for money. And then Manhattan is established, and the story goes that the island of Manhattan is purchased from the Indians there, they say, for approximately $24. So 22,000 acres for pennies. So this is a harbor. If you've ever been to New York, there's lots of ships coming in and out. There's a large harbor there, and it is a company town. So trade again, ships coming in and out, these natural harbors, but there is no religious toleration. Free speech isn't tolerated, and this is not a democratic area. The governors were appointed by the Dutch government, and any religious dissenters against the Dutch Reformed Church were persecuted. Ultimately, the Dutch did allow some local assemblies with limited powers because there were many protests by those colonists. So these are characteristics of New Amsterdam 30 years later. So from 1630 to 1660, it changed a little bit. They started granting what they called patroonships. That's an important word to remember. The Dutch had these land grants that they called patroonships, and these were feudal estates, and promoters got them, and basically they would break this into areas where 50 people, they would bring 50 people in, much like the headright system, to settle in these areas. It became very what we call cosmopolitan, a diverse population, different people from different lands and different languages. So this just shows some of the patroonships that were granted, and you could see we have the I'm not even going to try to say the one in Albany, Livingston, Great Knight Partners, and so forth. So all these were patroonships that were granted. Okay. New Sweden is going to be established to the south of New Netherland. We'll talk about that in a second. All right. So the Swedes, they come over. They're also kind of in a golden age, and they settle a small colony to the south of New Netherlands. So the Dutch governor, appointed governor at that time, Peter Stuyvesant, he decides that he wants that area for the Dutch. He takes in some troops, and their main fort falls. They basically just surround it, and they surrender, and New Sweden is absorbed into New Netherlands. Okay, New Netherlands becomes a British royal colony, and the way it becomes a British royal colony is Charles III decides that he's just going to give that land to his brother. Of course, he didn't own it at the time. So what does he do? In 1664, he sends his brother with English soldiers. And the Dutch did not have the defenses to fight them off. They didn't have much ammunition, and they had poor defenses set up. So Stuyvesant basically surrenders without firing a shot. The area is renamed New York, and they're told to be nice to the Dutch. So now England has this harbor, and they basically have colonies up and down the entire Atlantic coast. So this is the original charter from Charles III to his brother. You can see it encompasses Connecticut, part of Connecticut, and New Jersey as well. New Amsterdam is a very bustling and busy harbor, and when it becomes New York City, it continues that way, and it's going to continue that way right up until the present day. This is a Dutch portrait, or a portrait of some aristocrats, and yeah, our art has progressed. So this is kind of what New York City looked like from the coast in 1673. You can see it's built up. There are a lot of dwellings. They had a system of monetary system, and put some of their famous folks on their coin. But the Dutch did leave an influence in New York City. Names such as Harlem and Brooklyn come from the Dutch. The gambrel roof that you can see in many of the buildings, and then neat customs, Easter eggs come from Holland, and Santa Claus, waffles, bowling, sleighing, skating, and golf. Okay, all of those are left as traditions now in our world and in New York City. So let's talk about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the colony of the Quakers. Okay, they were called Quakers because it said they quaked during intense religious practices. They offended religious and secular leaders in England, and so left there. They refused to pay taxes to support the Church of England. They met without paid clergy, basically just the congregation. They did have elders, but no head of the church. They believed that everybody was a child of God, and they didn't believe in that class structure to treat upper classes or lower classes. They said we were all equal. So if you ever look at the pictures of the Quakers, they have their hats on. They use these and thous when addressing one another. They will not take an oath, and they are pacifists. Many immigrants did come into Pennsylvania. So this is a land grant to William Penn, the original land grant. couple of things he did differently. He did not take the land from the Indians. They bought the land from the Indians. They actually went in unarmed. But as more and more non-Quaker Europeans came into Pennsylvania, they tended to treat the native people poorly, and this undermined the actions of and the intentions of the Quakers. So this was an original treaty that Penn made with the natives, and basically saying that he was not going to try and take their land. They were not going to be aggressive towards them. The government of Pennsylvania was a representative assembly. Anybody who owned land could vote. No taxes went to the church. They believed in freedom of worship, guaranteed to all. And the English government, though, said that they were not allowed to let Catholics or Jews vote. They established a death penalty only for treason and murder, compared to England that had 200 crimes that would result in the death penalty. Pennsylvania society was diverse. Many religious misfits from other colonies came in. They had many different ethnic groups. They had no military defense system, no restrictions on immigration, and no slavery. They did have blue laws. Sumptuary laws are basically laws against excess. So they had laws against stage plays, cards, dice, excessive hilarity. You can see that Boston had all crookedy streets. That's because they were right on the coastline. And Philadelphia had very neat and tidy, square, laid out streets. You can see the growth here. Philadelphia is going to be the fastest growing city in the colonies from late 1600s to 1775, right before the Revolution. New Jersey. New Jersey is Pennsylvania's neighbor, and they received a grant from the Duke of York, these aristocratic proprietors, and a lot of New Englanders moved to New Jersey for better soil. West New Jersey is sold to the Quakers, then East New Jersey eventually is acquired by the Quakers, and by 1702 it is combined into New Jersey and one colony. Delaware. So Delaware is also Pennsylvania's neighbor, and it's named after Lord Delaware. If you remember, he was the Irish tactics with Jamestown and the governor of Virginia. And in 1703, it's granted its own assembly, but it does remain under the control of Pennsylvania until the American Revolution.